Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Skype sessions. I'm David, and I am here with Ron Ratliff. Hey, Ron, how's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. This is a lovely sunny day in Wisconsin. I've got a little bit of Earl Grey to keep me going, and I've now got you on the line to talk about your work. But before we get to that, would you mind just introducing yourself to our viewers?
Sure. I'm Ron Ratliff. I live in Manhattan, Kansas. I grew up about 20 minutes from Manhattan in Junction City, Kansas.
Oh,
I
okay.
was raised in a Protestant evangelical home. I went to Bible college, attended Dallas Theological Seminary, and then about in the mid 80s, after I graduated from seminary, I went through a really difficult time in my life, and C.S. Lewis rescued me from that. I ended up not going into full time ministry. I spent about 30 years in some form of public education, taught high school English, ended up being a librarian, worked for a while in a state university, and then finished my last 15 years working for a little Christian college here in Manhattan. Very, very wonderful people, and developed a C.S. Lewis class over the years. And also when I worked for the university, I had to travel. You have to write. You have to do that academic thing. And I connected with the C.S. Lewis Foundation and read academic papers at some of their Oxbridge conferences for a number of years. So I just semi-retired a year ago and was hired by my parish. I'm a Catholic convert, thanks to C.S. Lewis and Walter Hooper, which is a whole nother story. But we have a sort of a branch outreach here at St. Isidore's Catholic Center, which is the Catholic parish associated with Kansas State University. And it's a relatively new adventure. It's called Kansa Catholic, and they hired me to create courses and content for Kansa Catholic. And I started last year, and around Christmas time, we published my first course, which was a course on Mere Christianity. So that's as quick as I can summarize everything. Keep it, not lose anybody.
Well, we have to circle back to Walter Hooper. As viewers know, I met him briefly when I was in Oxford, seemingly by chance, if you believe in such things. How did you connect with Walter?
In one of my research for wanting to do a paper for an Oxbridge conference, I wanted to explore Lewis's letters, specifically how he used mentoring, spiritual mentoring. And so I had the first two volumes of his letters and was waiting anxiously. And finally, towards the end of 2006, volume 3 came out. And being a librarian, I was blown away by the scholarship. The content of it was just remarkable. And so, being in my 50s, you'd think I would be old enough not to do this. I wrote him a fan letter, found his home address. Librarians have tricks. Found his home address and wrote him just a thank you letter that I was so impressed with this, and a labor of love. Sent it off, never expecting to hear back from him. I knew who he was and never expected a letter back. But about a month later, here's this 2-page single-spaced letter with his email address. And that started a friendship. I went to visit him at his home 3 or 4 times in Oxford, and he became a mentor and a very, very good friend. Everybody knew Walter, and Walter reached out to lots and lots of people, and it was just one of those unexpected graces and unexpected things that we became friends with each other. I miss him terribly.
And viewers, if this is the first time you've heard Walter Hooper mentioned, go back last season. We did a multi-part memorial series on him where we interviewed all of the people who met him and just fell madly in love with him.
Yes. He was very, very gracious. He could be ornery at times, but he certainly, the thing I remember about him was his unbelievable graciousness and his willing to talk to people. You talked to him for a couple minutes and you felt like you had known him for a long time. And over years and years of us corresponding with each other, our emails were always a treasure to get and read.
I bet. We do need somebody to collate his letters in the same way that he did Lewis's, I
Yes,
think.
yes. I made the mistake of not keeping our correspondence for about the first 9 months. And then it dawned on me, Ron, you've got to keep this. He's giving you gold. So I kept our correspondence after about 9 months to a year. I kept all of it and have done a little bit of publishing, putting a little bit out there. He gave me permission to use it if I wanted to, which was very gracious of him.
Lovely. Well, let's talk about your work, what you've recently
Okay.
produced.
Okay.
You've done a video course called Mere Christianity for Modern Catholics.
Yes.
Why?
Well, part of what we want to do with Kansa Catholic is to connect Catholics with Catholics are known to have a rich tradition anyway, but oftentimes regular Catholics maybe haven't read like they would like to, or they haven't had the time to do things that they'd like to. So we thought that a good way to start out building something and producing stuff would be Mere Christianity, because it's a work that Lewis had the wonderful ability to reach across to Catholics, to Orthodox. Everybody has a great affinity for Lewis. He's well spoken of by Orthodox and Catholic scholars. And having taught Lewis for a number of years, I thought that Mere Christianity would be a good start, because I thought it would give Catholics a good grounding in the basics of the Christian faith, but not simplified. It was something that would have depth to it, that would be challenging, because Lewis is always challenging, but also accessible. And that, I think, is one of Lewis's great gifts, is his ability to take a deep subject and put it in such a way that lay people can understand it and are hungry for more. So we wanted to do kind of a two-part thing where we talk about the content of the Christian faith and then also the living of the Christian faith, which I think he emphasizes a lot in the second part of Mere Christianity, that God isn't concerned that we just believe certain things, but that we are on the way to becoming a certain kind of person. And that's what we wanted to bring out in the course.
And the course is divided into 7 sections.
Yes.
And Mere Christianity was based on 4 books. So how did that division work out? Or did you just want to get a nice biblical, solid, covenantal number in there?
Well, we didn't start off thinking that way. When I looked the book over, and I soon realized I had bitten off a whole new different kind of way of teaching and presenting something which was completely new to me. And as I worked through things, I thought, let's do book 1 and book 2 as one episode. I thought I could cover everything in about a 25 or 30 minute summary, and that includes, of course, deciding what you leave in and what you leave out. So that was pretty much not too difficult to do. It's when we get into books 3 and 4 that if book 1 and book 2 aren't enough, you realize that when you get into book 3, you've waded out so far out into the ocean and have dropped off into an abyss. So we decided for books 3 and 4 to break it into 2 sessions and make it so viewers can get the first half of the book and then think about it. And then when they're ready, they can go back and look at the second part of books 3 and 4. And then episode 7 kind of came around as we thought, since Lewis was an Anglican, obviously, there's some things that Catholics would have some loving disagreements with Lewis over. And so we decided to do, and I think it's the briefest of about a 15 or 20 minute, what I refer to as a gentle critique of Mere Christianity, so that Catholics can kind of understand, here's where we would maybe part ways with Lewis on some things, but still. And I was able to find, fortunately, Catholic writers themselves who love Lewis, but who wanted to gently point out, here's where we would maybe part with him on certain things. And then I felt like one of the criticisms, and especially in the world we live in today, to do a little bit of addressing Lewis's statements in the book about women, and to kind of give a perspective about that. And again, I found some Lewis scholars who are women who have an understanding of the times that he lived in, that he was a bachelor for most of his life, and then found some wonderful letters by Dorothy Sayers, who just would just tell Lewis, you don't know what you're talking about. And they were great friends with each other. So it's like I said, episode 7 was just a gentle look at maybe some things that Catholics would have a little bit of difference with, but still promote the book as this is so good. You need to watch this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the way that Lewis speaks about marriage and women in Mere Christianity, I would stand by pretty much everything that he says, although I would say that he wouldn't have said it quite in that way. And
Yes.
it's quite so unnuanced in a couple of areas later in his life, because you definitely see a very clear maturing of his understanding of women as he got to hang out with more of them. We actually just finished The Four Loves this season, and you get to see a more mature Lewis, although people still, I think, misinterpret what he says there. But you get to see a Lewis who by this point in his life has had some really solid friendships with women like Dorothy Sayers, Ruth Pitter, the woman who had become his wife, Joy Davidman.
Yes.
You get to see how things have developed there, just as he's simply just been exposed to wonderful, intelligent women.
Yes. And and I don't remember offhand who I found. It was in a book of Lewis criticism, was from a woman scholar, and she recognized that Lewis was a work in progress through his life, and she thought we need to give him the benefit of the doubt and understand his times that he lived in. And then I've seen some interviews with women who studied under him at Oxford, and they said he was absolutely delightful. He wasn't condescending. He didn't view them as something other. They really enjoyed his tutorials and enjoyed his company. So, but I just felt like we needed to do a little something to address that.
Mm-hmm. And what were some of the Catholic differences that you focus on in that final section? What are the bits that you think need a little bit more clarification from a Catholic point of view?
Probably the biggest one, and this is what I dealt with most of all, is his analogy of the house. That
yes,
and I think that's in the preface where he talks about this, where you come into the house, which is the church, and there's different rooms in it. And one of the scholars that I found, Father Ian Carr, who was a Lewis enthusiast, very, very much. But he kind of gently argues that we would say that the house is the Catholic Church, and other denominations would be sort of little outhouse, not outhouse, but outlying houses that would connect to the building. And that's, again, it's probably something that most people wouldn't catch, but for we Catholics, it's something that we hold very, very dear, and just wanted to point that out. And so our listeners, or the people who watch this, are going to be mostly Catholics, but I hope others are too, just so that they have an understanding of that. That's probably the primary. And then there's a few times when Lewis is referring to church or the sacraments, just to gently point out where we might differ with Lewis on some of those things. Kind of minor, but still, interpretive things.
And typically just push some things a little bit further than perhaps Lewis would have been bold enough to do. There's a wonderful book by Father Longenecker called More Christianity, where he basically tries to follow a Mere Christianity style of book, but to point to, okay, you've read that, now this is what a Catholic would then say to draw out some of these ideas a little bit further.
Yes. Yes, and that's and I tried to point out that there's Catholic writers like Joseph Pearce, Peter Kraft, who are very well-known Catholics who adore Lewis and readily. And I remember one of the a quote that I read by Peter Kraft some years ago. He said, the only reason people don't quote Lewis more is they're too ashamed to admit how right he is. So many things. And I thought that was a very generous, but he loves Lewis, and so does Father Ian Carr that I quote from. So there is this kindredship, I think, between Lewis and Catholics, even though I want to make very clear that Lewis never became Catholic and was not going to become Catholic. And we need to appreciate that.
And also, Mere Christianity is a really great starting point to have conversations, because very often Lewis is presenting ancient doctrine with slightly different language, or he's coming at it from a slightly different point of view, which can take down a lot of those polemics that we would normally throw up.
Yes.
He has helped us get around that, and so okay, let's talk in Lewisian language what we mean here, such as his distinction of the kinds of life. I find that a really helpful way of communicating what Catholics understand by the sacraments. Well, if you understand this Zoe life that Lewis is talking about, well, that's what we're talking about. But in a far more wonderful way than you might have ever thought possible.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think that's what I tried to do in the course is bring those things out and present them in such a way that I was trying to let Lewis do as much talking as possible, but also to lead them along and say, think about this in a different way. Think about this as here's a different way of maybe looking at that or considering that. And that's what I especially wanted to do in book one, because a lot of people may not know how what's sort of an intellectual basis for what we believe that is right and wrong. And I emphasize there's lots of different approaches to this. This is just one way that Lewis thought this would be a way to connect with his original listeners on the BBC. But I think it still holds a lot of weight to say, here's one way of, and I love the title, Right and Wrong is a Clue to the meaning of the universe. He's not saying this is it. He's saying this is just one of the things to think about. And I think that resonates with readers and hopefully with listeners that, oh, okay, there's different ways of looking at it. And here's one, and this might work for you.
Yeah. Now, when we were exchanging emails, you said that you're working on another project at the moment.
Yes.
Would you mind telling us what it is?
Yes. I'm in final edits to do another 7-part series, this time on the Great Divorce. I thought originally we were thinking about doing the abolition of man, and I teach that in my Lewis course. But I worked on it for a couple of months, and I said I need to probably do more of this kind of media teaching and come back to it, because I was that old saying of putting the cookies down on the shelf so everybody can get to them. I was just really racking my brain trying to take Lewis's concepts and put them down into. And then the more I thought about it, I said, I think the Great Divorce would be something that viewers would be more interested in, because it deals more with things in our daily life, the decisions we make. So that's been working on it, and we're getting close to finally shooting that series. And I would say probably by early next year, or sometime this fall, it should probably be out, maybe closer to Thanksgiving or Christmas.
That makes me really happy. The Great Divorce is my favorite of his books.
It is so. I'm finding myself in another, am I running down this rabbit trail too much and pull myself back and get back on course, because there's just so much to talk about in that book.
And it's also one that can very often confuse people, particularly if they haven't read the preface, because they jump straight into chapter 1 and then they find out about heaven and hell and purgatory, and then they get all confused. Is this what Lewis thinks is real?
Yes.
And that's not the point. That's not what he is doing in that book. He wants to show you about the choices that you make and setting it against the backdrop of eternity. So you see how ridiculous it is when you choose your souvenirs from hell, your sinful inclinations over something that is so much better. Like he says in Weight of Glory, we're like children playing mud pies because we've got no idea what it means to have a holiday by the sea. We are too easily pleased.
We are too easily pleased. And that's with my students, and also with friends that I've known over the years who've tried to read The Great Divorce, and they get about the first chapter into it and they're ready to stop. And I tell them, no, 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 no. Here's what's going on. And so with the course, I'm trying to set that up in the introduction to prepare them for what they're going to run into. And that Lewis is having a little bit of fun comparing himself to Dante. Dante finds himself in a dark wood, and here's Lewis in this dark town. So
Mm-hmm.
trying to draw these little images together, they're just so wonderful.
And whereas Lewis thought Paradiso was heavenly, appropriately enough, I wasn't quite so moved by it. But yet, when I read The Great Divorce, there is a crescendo towards the end when you meet Sarah Smith and the incident with
Yes.
the lizard on the shoulder, and you get to see that
Oh,
when
yes.
when your sinful desires are submitted to holy hands, they can be killed and raised again and be the very means for your entry into heaven.
Yes, yes. I've had my students through the years. We start the course off with The Great Divorce, and I've had students over the years, when we get to the lizard, they have come up to me and said, if this hadn't been in this book, I would not have liked it. But because the lizard is there, they love the book. And I've had them say, they find themselves talking to the characters, saying, will you drop it? Will you see what you're doing to yourself? So it's really fascinating how the readers get into the book. And when that
Mm.
time comes with the lizard, it's really, I think, one of the big payoffs for the book.
Yeah. Now, are you going to try
Great
and do
stuff.
all of his corpus, or do you have other things in mind?
Eventually, we're going to come back to the abolition of man, but post Great Divorce, the idea right now is that we'll do an abbreviated course on the screw tape letters. We're not going to do all 31 of them,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe do 14 of them and do a thematic study where we'll tie a couple letters together, 2 or 3 letters where he's talking about the same kind of thing and a little bit different approach to it this
Mm-hmm.
time. So that's probably early next year, or at least late this fall, that I'll start working on that. After that, we're going to probably, since we are a Catholic media ministry, we'll turn to start doing some Catholic authors and some Catholic books. Flannery O'Connor,
Mm-hmm.
Walker Percy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bottomless pit to draw from. So we'll just kind of take it as it comes.
Maybe not bottomless pit, more of like a peakless mountain.
There you go. That's much better imagery. I should never try to do things off the cuff. It gets me in trouble.
Well, this is wonderful. Would you mind telling our viewers where they can go to find the course?
Yes, there's 2 easy ways to find it. The easiest is to go simply to merechristianitycourse.com. Believe it or not, that domain was not taken. Or the other way is to go to konzacatholic.com, and it's Konza with a K, Konza, Catholic.com. Manhattan sits in the area of Kansas known as the Flint Hills, and
Mm-hmm.
the Konza Prairie, which is one of the last portions of the old prairie from hundreds of years ago, is just not far from Manhattan. So konzacatholic.com, I think it's still up on the front page. It's $17, so it's not expensive. And I hear from people who write me, and you can definitely get a hold of me. I have one group here in Manhattan. Some people bought the course, they're reading the book and then watching the video, and then they've invited me to come to their group and
Oh,
wrap
lovely.
things up for them. I told them I'd be glad to do that. Very, very humbled to do that. So that's where you can find us.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful companion that somebody could have alongside a book club. Our podcast
Yes,
as well, naturally. But, you want to give people
exactly.
something visual as well.
Definitely, very definitely.
Ron, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh yes, it's a privilege to be able to do this, and I thank you very, very much.
You're very welcome. And viewers, please join us again next time when we'll continue going further up and further in. Cheers.